India has its largest ever adolescent and the largest youth population. More than 50% of India's population is below the age of 25 and more than 65% below the age of 35. Yes, we are the youngest country in the world. But the mental well-being of youth has emerged as a critical concern. This significant and complex issue requires attention and action. To understand the mental health landscape of our country's youth, the several factors that contribute to the mental health challenges, and a lot more, today, as part of NDTV Yuva, we have with us, let me introduce them to you. We have with us Dr. Amit Sen, Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist, Director, Children First; Amrita Tripathi, writer and founder, The Health Collective; Divija Bhasin, counseling psychologist and founder, The Friendly Couch; and Kerry Bharatram, founder and CEO, Tipsy Beauty. Thank you all so much for coming forward to speak about such a critical and important subject. I would like to start with you, Dr. Sen. You have over 30 years of experience dealing with children and adolescents when it comes to psychology, and you've been practicing this for so long. If you can just tell us, to start this conversation for our youth here today, what are the major health issues when it comes to mental health? What are the disorders which you see are most common, and how much has changed in the last 30 years when we talk about the mental health landscape?
Thank you, Ambika. So the landscape has changed dramatically. When I started doing psychiatry, which was 35 years ago, child mental health or child and adolescent mental health was in the back burner. Nobody really thought it was an important issue. They didn't think that there were many young people who had mental health problems. If they had behavioral problems, which had need to be corrected through discipline. Over the last 30, 35 years, that's changed dramatically. Now we have an exponential rise in conditions like depression, anxiety, and some others which we didn't see at all 30 years ago, like eating disorders. Eating disorders is again something that is driven by the changes that we see in our culture and the way young people look at their bodies. And so body dysmorphia is yet another very troublesome condition. Then you have substance misuse, which is really skyrocketed. Children who are as young as 11, 12 begin to experiment with substances. By the time they come to class 6 in middle school, they start doing it. And by the time they're older, adolescents and colleges, it's absolutely rampant across the board, right? And then you have deliberate self-harm, because that's another thing that has really come up. I mean, it's not as if there was no deliberate self-harm or suicide in the past. There was, perhaps shrouded in a lot of stigma and all that. But right now, young people have somehow acquired that as a way of expressing their anguish, their pain, their distress. It's a part of the culture. Everybody, whenever they go through difficult times, that's the way they want to express themselves. And also, if I may call it, rates of suicide, they are scary. And unfortunately, India holds the devious distinction of being the country which has the highest rate of youth suicide. In the age range of 15 to 29, we by far, outpace other parts of the world. So these are the common things that we see now. But that's the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot that is happening underneath, which we don't get to know at all.
And it's only growing, and it's becoming more and more alarming, like you said.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Amrita, if I can just come to you here, you founded the Health Collective about 7 years ago. Tell us, how has the community grown? Now that we know, that it's just going up, the cases are going up, we're getting to know about a lot of other disorders. Tell us about the community.
Thank you so much, and it's lovely to be here. And actually, Dr. Sen is one of the first people I spoke to when I decided to set up the Health Collective, so it's full circle for me. We set the Health Collective up actually based on my work as a journalist, based on my work as a health editor, and covering stories like we discussed, Ambika, when it comes to mental health in the news, in the newsroom. And I still remember, it was about 7 or 8 years ago, actually, I saw a tweet from someone I didn't know talking about a friend who was in acute distress, sitting in Mumbai, and they didn't know where to reach out for help. And I saw this tweet 2 days late, and I pinged it to say, I'm sure you figured out, who this person can reach out to for help by now. And I was acutely distressed myself to know that they didn't know. And this is very privileged, English-speaking, urban, it's a metro in India, right? So we started by just saying, okay, let's at least make sure we can get information out there that can be potentially life-saving. For example, anyone watching this, as we talk about things like suicide, and if you're feeling distressed, you need to know that you're not alone, that help is available, and we do have helplines up. So we shared the helplines, and we started as a resource really for credible information. And I think what's changed is these conversations are much more mainstream now. I don't think we'd have had a panel like this 7 years ago on a topic like this. what ended up happening with the Health Collective, though, was something very beautiful and organic, I feel, because 3 people, I still remember, sent in their stories. It was not what we intended to do, but they sent in stories talking about what it was like to live with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and depression. 2 of those didn't want to use their names, 1 person did. And literally through word of mouth, we now have about 500 stories on the site, comics, we have artists, and you do realize, even through these interviews, and when, some of you are watching this panel or listening to us here, mental health is something that affects everyone. There is no us and them, right? So we might talk about the diagnosis, or we might ask Dr. Sen about the statistics and say, how common, how prevalent are these disorders? But each and every one of us does have mental health. And I think learning with the community as it grows, the pandemic is something where we saw, of course, a spike in search, a spike in interest around things like anxiety. And I think at this point, having reached about 300,000 people, we're like, okay, what's the next step in this kind of evolution?
So when you say from 3 stories to 500 plus, that also means that people want to have conversation. I mean, obviously they're trusting, but that also means that they want to put out their stories, which is important. Divija, I want to come to you here and ask you, I mean, you're on Instagram known as the Awkward Goat Tree, right? Why did you choose social media as a way to communicate with people? Because sometimes, it can get tricky. And how has the response been? What are the kind of queries that you get from, people who are reaching out to you through social media?
So I turned to social media because it's just fun. It's a nice, creative way to talk about mental health. I think we need to normalize the conversation around mental health by making it more fun and entertaining, because mental health is not just sadness, depression, anxiety. Those are important parts of mental health. But it's also about how you live life, what parenting is like, education, these kind of conversations. We never talk about these things when we talk about mental health. We somehow only talk about depression and anxiety as the core things, which is not a bad thing, but we need to see the other side as well, which is why I turned to social media. And I don't just talk about depression, anxiety kind of problems, suicide. I also talk about the things that we go through in daily life, like the experiences that we have in school. So that is a huge part of our mental health and how we are brought up. And what was the other question?
Yeah, so what are the kind of queries you see? Like, when other youngsters reaching out to you, especially if I ask you about the youth, what are their problems really?
A lot of young people actually message me and say that they want to take therapy and they feel the need for it, but their parents are not allowing them, which is really sad, because it's as if parents see therapy as a really bad thing. Like, there is this notion, right, that therapy is a Western concept and that is not for the Indian population. But somehow the youth recognizes this, and unfortunately the obstacle in the way is parents. So actually, when we talk about youth mental health, we need to talk about parents as well and not blame them. It's not their fault. When they were growing up, there was no concept of mental health. We need to validate the problems of the parents and understand their expectations as well. But definitely, we need to have parents in these conversations, because they have the power to improve the mental health of not just their own children, but also of the youth of the whole country.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point. I think as parents, even we need to understand children, and I am going to come to that question later because I also have a question there. Kerry, I just want to ask you here. I mean, of course, you're running Tipsy Beauty, doing really well. If you can take us through your journey, when you were at 17, you were diagnosed with depression. I mean, first of all, thank you for coming out here, speaking to our youth, encouraging all of them. If you can just take us to a story, I think a big round of applause for Kerry, because like I think Amrita said, out of the 3 stories which came, only 1 person gave out a name. So for Kerry to come here in front of all of us who need to talk out there, please take us through your journey and tell us about it.
Thank you so much. So my journey started towards the end of school. I was in class 12 and I started having these panic attacks, and we didn't understand what it was. And I remember I went to my school principal because my dad didn't know what to do with me, and she was the one who first said that I think you need to see somebody because this isn't regular panic before an exam. This seems to be something more. So then we went to Dr. Sen and they diagnosed me with first anxiety and then depression, and I kind of lost interest in school. I stopped meeting friends. I became very, very self-negative. I just didn't want to wake up the next day. I just didn't want to exist. And it kind of took a turn and became really bad really quickly. I'd gotten into my dream college. I'd worked hard. I couldn't go. I had to let it go. I took 2 gap years, and everyone was like moving ahead and I was moving backwards. I couldn't leave my house. I needed my parents for everything. I was just moving steps and steps backward. And eventually I was also diagnosed with bipolar. So it was just kind of seeming hopeless. We tried a lot of things and nothing worked. And eventually, after 3 years or so, I did go to college in the UK, and that really helped me kind of get back into normal life. And even though there was no pressure on me for grades or anything, it was just about living in the society again after, 3 years of like a sabbatical from life. And then I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that for me was the biggest relief. It was a diagnosis that I was very welcoming of, because it explained everything that I didn't like about myself, and it also explained why my depression started, which is what we spent years trying to figure out. And that ADHD that didn't let me keep up with my classmates, that I was not able to do things like them, all of that led to like lack of self-confidence that led to depression. So once we figured that out, I think I really started to get better. And I also, in that time, wrote this book. In fact, I didn't write it as a book. I used to use, in therapy, I used to talk about what I was feeling through metaphors. And one day, my therapist, who is Dr. Sen's wife, she told me that, why don't you put this all together? Because it will be really helpful for me to share it with my other patients. And that's when I got the idea. And of course, everyone was very hesitant about publishing a book about depression, because even my parents, who were like very forward thinking, thought I'd get labeled and this is what I'd get known for. And I had no problem with it somehow. And I felt like if somebody could get helped because of what I went through, then what I went through wouldn't be in vain, and that it would make it more worth it. So I bit the bullet and published this book. And luckily, the response has all been positive, and everybody has been really happy and encouraging, and I think really made me feel good about the fact that I'm being so open about it, and I hope that it can help people.
I'm sure, and Kerry has authored a book called C is for Cat and D is for Depression. So I would like to mention that, like you rightly said. So that's the book. I think, yeah, like you said, you had parent support who actually took you to a doctor, a counselor, and then that's how you started therapy. But very important is, I think, the diagnosis. And something, before I come on to my next question, just a quick question on ADHD. Dr. Sen, we are hearing that sometimes ADHD goes undiagnosed, and it can lead to issues. And the cases are increasing across the world, not just India.
Yes, indeed. Am I audible? Oh, yeah, now I am. So I think ADHD is a condition which has been misunderstood for decades now, and it's increasingly, we find that people who are very bright, intelligent, capable may have traits or symptoms or signs of ADHD, which can then begin to interfere with the way they want to do things, perhaps education. Then it begins to affect their self-esteem, as Karavi so eloquently expressed. And then if it's untreated, if it goes unnoticed, eventually it can lead to many other mental health difficulties, which are really complications of it. So right now, in the adult population, people who visit psychiatrists often have a pre-existing condition which they have actually lived with throughout their childhood and adolescent years. And because of that condition, they've firstly developed a very negative view of themselves, and the world around them has also treated them very differently, calling them lazy, good for nothing, a waster, not trying hard enough.
Yeah. Judging them without really knowing why.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that happens all the time in our society. We're a society where we are highly competitive, we're looking for success in young people very early in their lives. So all those kind of things begin to impact you. And then eventually a range of other disorders then get associated with ADHD. So it's vital that we understand it amongst parents in schools, all educational institutions, in workspaces which actually, employ young people and who might have their own struggles if they have not been picked up or diagnosed early enough.
Yeah, so I think the important is to find out, identify the issue. Amrita, again, coming to numbers, you've been a journalist for 15 years, and every journalist, numbers, data, facts play a very, very crucial role. We were talking about suicides, right? Dr. Sen said that over 20 kids are dying every day in our country because of suicide. Where are the gaps, really? You've also written, your latest book was on suicides. Where are the gaps?
Yeah, No, so I did co-author a book called Life Interrupted with two senior psychiatrists on suicide. And for me, what was fascinating was actually that in India and South Asia, mental health isn't the key determinant for suicide. It's a multifactorial, very complicated issue. We have seen that India's supposedly, 20% of the world's suicides, as Dr. Sen said, a majority of young people in our country are taking their lives. And I think the fact of the matter is the numbers themselves are underreported, right? So that number 20, it is likely much higher. For the longest time, suicide was a criminal offense. It was decriminalized a few years ago. But as a result, your reporting is also through the National Crimes Bureau, right? Yeah. Your reporting is basically how we get access to these stories. I am obsessed with numbers and data, like you just said. I think, look, 3% of the population having anxiety, 1 in 4 globally having some sort of mental health issue. But it's after working with multiple people, multiple stakeholders, talking to a lot of young people, I realized, Ambika, I think it's journalists who are obsessed more with data, statistics, and facts. Most people want to hear stories. So what we just heard, for example, I've lost track of the number of people, and I'm sure this happens to you all the time, people coming up to you afterwards to say, you know what, I read your story, I heard you talking, I felt less alone. And that really shifted my perspective.
And that's what I think really leaves an impact. Like,
yes.
That's what I said. It's, the way Kervi's come and spoken, the courage,
exactly.
I think that's what matters.
Exactly.
If I can come to you, Divija, you said something about therapy. Just going back to that, right? People have misconceptions about therapy. I think the first step to actually think that one needs a therapy is a tough decision. Can you tell us some misconceptions about therapy?
So the first misconception is that only people who are crazy or mad need therapy. I don't think so. I think everyone is crazy in some way or the other. And the word crazy is not derogatory. Like, it's used as an insult. And that word actually means someone with mental illness. So the concept is that people who go to therapy are weaker and lesser than the normal average person. But the thing is, everyone has anxiety at some point. It just becomes a disorder when it's really extreme. But you can also need therapy. Even needing therapy is like the wrong terminology. Just needing support, professional support from someone who knows what they're doing and has the experience. So the misconception is that not everyone can go to a therapist. But I personally think everyone can need therapy at some point. We all struggle at some point. We might not get depression and we might not feel suicidal. But that doesn't mean that support will be useless, right? Like the way we all go to a doctor at some point. We all don't all have diseases at all times, right? But we all go at some point.
In fact, before I come to you, Kervi, I want to ask Dr. Sen something. You said we all go to a doctor at some point. I think this is something which we all really need to think because, when we're looking at physical health, the minute a child a mother conceives, from the womb, you're taking care of the child. You're telling the mother, eat well, then you say, okay, have your folic acid, then you take care of once the baby is born, then vaccination, you go to the pediatrician. Dr. Sen, we're looking at the physical aspect of a child, but it is proven that physical and mental health is connected, very deeply connected. What about the mental aspect of a child? We're not even thinking at that level.
Absolutely. In fact, before I start answering the question, I just want to reflect on all that has been said. Already we are becoming aware that mental health difficulties, challenges are othered. They're looked at derogatorily. So it's dehumanizing to go to, a shrink and get medicated for most people. And that is why there is this reluctance. I think COVID has taught us that it's not you versus me, or it's not only those people who have mental health problems. In our experience during COVID times, and we actually opened our services for many young people who were stranded in their jobs, they lost their fledgling jobs, or they got stuck in a hostel for months, weeks and months together. And they were very, so-called very successful, very capable kids who did not have any mental health problems before this struck them. But so many of them went through depression, anxiety, eating problems, and self-harm behaviors as well. And that, for I think the larger community, opened this idea up that it can happen to anybody. Indeed, what Amrita said is so true, that all of us go through some mental health struggles or the other, just like we go through financial struggles, physical health struggles. Like, for instance, and because this has such a stigma, it weighs so heavy on us, that we don't talk about it. For instance, as to answer your question, that for children, even before they're born, actually, we take care of mother's health, we take care of vaccinations, we make sure that the birth is normal and safe. Then we take them through vaccinations, we look at diet and hygiene, we constantly talk to them about the health and what to do. The moment there is a question mark about physical health, we rush them to a pediatrician. We do all that, isn't it? Right? If you look at it from the mental health aspect, what do we do? Are we even aware what needs to be done so that children do not begin to feel stressed out, they don't know how to cope with things, they do not develop the so-called resilience that we talk about often in mental health, where you learn how to understand your own self, you learn your responses to the world outside, and you begin to cope with it.
Yeah.
None of that is actually spoken about, none of that is taught. None of the emotional literacy that should be, I believe, mandatory in schools and homes everywhere is just not mentioned anywhere. And that is and the reason why we reach a place where mental health and suicide is skyrocketing is because we haven't addressed the things that lead up to it.
Yeah.
And
So
that's where we need to look now.
So it's a
at
different
promotion
aspect, and that
prevention.
vertical needs to be taken care of,
Yes,
from breaking the stigma to
absolutely.
looking at all the insights.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I want to ask you, when we talk about, there was a report that Gen Z, the millennials, they have more stress. Why do they have more stress, and how should they cope with this stress?
I don't know if they have more stress, or now at least people are aware that the stress is a problem and not something they should be okay with and deal with. I think there is a lot of stress like in terms of this path that you need to follow, and you need to be ahead, and you need to come first in school, then first in college, then get a job. And that pressure, a lot of the times the parents are putting, and also the peers, because I've noticed even when, supposing my parents told me, don't worry, it's okay, I didn't want to sit out of the exams no matter how I was feeling because of what my friends would think. So there's a lot of pressure from friends, from parents, from teachers, from everyone, and social media, of course, because everyone is putting their best foot forward on social media and only showing the positives, and you want that for yourself. And even you're only showing the positives, but you don't realize that, it just creates this unrealistic expectation. So I just think but I feel like COVID has made a big difference in terms of awareness. I think people are accepting their stress and their mental health issues and other people's a lot more post-COVID.
Yeah. So I think we are running short of time. Quickly, a line or, sorry, Divija, you want to say something? So one quick line or closing remarks from each one of you, especially since we have the room full of youngsters here.
Okay. I just wanted to say that we often think that the Gen Z and the youth have more anxiety or more stress than other people. I just feel like they have the vocabulary for it. I think old people also go through anxiety. They call it ghabrahat in our culture, when actually that is anxiety. So we need to acknowledge that everyone goes through it. It's not increased in the young people. They're just more aware.
They're more aware, and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think if you have a show of hands, who's ever felt stressed in their life? I mean, that's pretty much all of us. And I think, including on this panel, we're not exempt from that. I would say just one message is just know whatever you're going through, you're not alone. Help is out there, whether it's through stories, whether it's through experts. Just know that there is a community. And sometimes, online is where you find your community if you feel there are barriers to getting help. And sorry, I'll slip in another one. It doesn't cost us anything. Everyone in this room, we can all learn to be kinder to each other. We have no idea what people are going through.
Absolutely. And I think talking is the most important. Dr. Sen?
Well, I want to highlight the very warped model in mental health that we follow. It's hierarchical, it's expert-driven, and it's a biomedical model that we follow, which we have borrowed from the West. Actually, in our culture, there are many other things that could be helpful. Besides, I think the youth, who are a lot more aware, are willing to talk about it, should take center stage, especially for their own health, and should take it up with the various stakeholders and make a claim that this is our space, and we want our mental health to be taken care of. We want the kind of infrastructure that is essential for us to feel good about ourselves, towards our well-being. And I think, and when I go to educational institutions, including schools, colleges, etc., that's what we talk about. We talk about including parents, teachers no doubt, but including the youth as well, to hear their voice, to understand what they're going through. Sometimes they are much better at knowing about their own lives than anybody else's.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll leave the last word to you, Kerry.
So I want to to say something to the people who are actually going through something right now. Just remember that right now everyone keeps telling you that it will get better. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it sounds amazing, but it's difficult to believe. But when you see people in front of you who have gone through it and come out, I think that should be an example that you can do it too. And don't expect a radical change that one day everything will be rainbows and sunshine. Like you have diabetes or something where you learn to live with it and manage it. That's what mental health is for me. For me, depression didn't go away. Today I'm running my own business. I've written books. You would think I'm successful, but I still live with these things. But I'm living a good life, and I've learned to manage it, and you could say, come out of it, but it's a part of me, and it's a part of you that makes you very strong. So yeah, it will get better, and just hang in there.
Thank you so much. I think that was really that was really needed. A big round of applause, please, for all our panelists, especially for Kervi. Thank you so much, Dr. Sen, Divija, Amrita, and Kervi. Well, like Dr. Sen had said, yes, today's youth will be tomorrow's inventors, creators, builders, and leaders. Despite growing awareness, there is still a significant stigma attached to mental health issues in India. Promotion, prevention, therapy, and treatment will only happen once the disorder is diagnosed, and diagnosis will only happen if you identify and acknowledge it. So to break the silence and stigma around the mental health of our young people, we need to actively engage educational institutions, teachers, and parents to initiate an open dialogue around it and encourage children and our youngsters to come forward and talk about their struggles, because mental health is just like physical health. Everybody has it, and we need to take care of it. Thank you all so much for watching.